You know, when you hear global leaders talk, they always say, the farmer is a symbol of prosperity. But if you actually read the fine print of international treaties, the farmer is a casualty. This isn't just simple buying and selling. It's a silent war, fought with weapons like Section 301 and Public Law 480. It's where a nation's historical trauma crashes right into economic desperation. We're talking about a battle over wheat that was literally declared fit only for pigs and the biological trap of genetically modified seeds. To really understand what's happening right now, we have to pull the whole system apart. So let's get into it.
So let's start with this massive contradiction at the heart of it all. On one side, you have all the political showmanship, the public praise for the noble farmer. And on the other side, well, that's the brutal reality of what international trade has actually become.
And this is the official story, right? This is the postcard perfect image they paint for all of us. It makes it seem like the system is designed to support and lift up the very people who feed the world. But what's really going on behind the curtain?
Well, here's the disconnect. The promise of food security often hides a much darker reality. For example, some of the U.S. wheat that was shipped to a famine-stricken India under so-called aid programs, it was such low quality that it was declared unfit for humans to even eat. And those diplomatic handshakes you see on the news, they're often just cover for some really ruthless economic warfare.
To really get a grip on this conflict, you have to know its weapons. And these aren't just some obscure regulations buried in a book somewhere. Section 301, Public Law 480, Genetic Drift. This is the legal and biological architecture that sets the rules, creates dependency, and ultimately decides who gets to hold all the power.
To see how this system got built in the first place, we have to understand its #1 weapon, the tariff. Now, on the surface, it seems like just a simple fee. But when you look at how it evolved, you see how it was deliberately forged into a powerful geopolitical tool.
You know, the idea of a trade tax is ancient. It started as something called nishatim, basically a fee for safe passage in Mesopotamia. The Romans called it portoria, and the word we use today, tariff, it actually comes from the Arabic word taraf, which was just the list of goods a merchant had to declare at the border. For centuries, its only purpose was to generate revenue. But then, that purpose was changed. On purpose.
And this is the moment everything shifted. Back in 1721, these high-quality, cheap Indian fabrics were just flooding the British market. They were threatening to completely wipe out the local industry. So Britain fought back with the Calico Acts. This wasn't about raising money anymore. It was about pure protectionism. It was a declaration of economic war. And just like that, the tariff was officially weaponized. This weaponization of tariffs, well, it eventually led to a total global catastrophe, which forced the world to try and design a brand new system. The problem is, that new system was engineered with a fatal flaw right from the very beginning.
The breaking point was the Great Depression. In a desperate attempt to protect American jobs, the U.S. passed the Smoot-Hawley Act, which slapped massive tariffs on thousands of imported goods. Well, other nations retaliated, trade walls shot up all over the globe, and world trade just collapsed by 2/3. It was an absolute disaster.
So after World War II, the survivors got together and basically said never again. They created something called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, and at its heart was this one single principle that was meant to keep things fair. Most favored nation. It just meant you had to treat all your trading partners equally. No special deals, no playing favorites.
It's a noble idea, right? In theory. But what if you're a superpower? What if you need to give your neighbors or your strategic allies a special advantage? Was there a way to get around the system's most important rule?
And here it is, Article 24, a deliberately inserted backdoor. It gave nations permission to form their own little exclusive clubs, free trade agreements that could operate completely outside that central no-favorites rule. So the most crucial point here is that the system designed to prevent favoritism was engineered from the very beginning to allow for it. This was its original sin.
Okay, so now let's trace how these economic tools create real-world human consequences. We're going to look at a specific moment in history that explains why, for some nations, food isn't about commerce at all. It's about sovereignty.
After World War II, American farms were producing these massive surpluses of grain. At the same time, nations like India were facing catastrophic famine. So the U.S. passed Public Law 480, a program to ship its extra grain to nations in need. On the surface, it looked like charity. But in reality, it was the forging of a dependency.
And just look at the scale of that dependency. By the 1960s, a staggering 40%. Think about that. 40% of all the grain being consumed in India was arriving on American ships. This wasn't just aid anymore. It was a strategic lifeline that could be cut at any moment. In 1965, during India's war with Pakistan, that is exactly what happened. The U.S. government, which was unhappy with India's foreign policy, started to delay and threaten those food shipments. The national humiliation of being brought to its knees over food was seared into India's institutional memory. And believe me, it continues to shape its policy to this very day.
So that historical trauma, that's the first pillar of this conflict. Now we're going to move to the second, a modern biological trap that makes open agricultural trade an existential threat.
This is the business model perfected by corporations like Monsanto. First, you sell a farmer a patented genetically modified seed that's been engineered to resist your proprietary weed killer. Second, you mandate in the contract that they can only use your chemical. Third, you legally forbid them from doing what farmers have done for centuries, saving their own seeds. The result? Total, inescapable corporate dependence.
This slide really shows you the fundamental shift in power. Traditionally, a farmer owned their seeds. It was a physical asset. But in the GM model, the farmer is just a licensee, basically renting the genetic code for a single season. It's a system designed to transform farmer independence into corporate dependence.
So when the U.S. pressures India to open its agricultural market, it's not a simple economic request. For India, it presents a whole series of risks that are just non-negotiable. There's the biological risk of irreversible genetic contamination, the economic risk that subsidized imports would wipe out millions of small farmers, the export risk of being locked out of other key markets, and a really profound cultural risk that's tied to food purity.
So we have historical trauma on one side and a biological trap on the other. Now let's bring it all together with the raw numbers that make this conflict a matter of mathematical certainty.
When Donald Trump took office, he was focused on one number above all others, the trade deficit. The U.S. was buying $800 billion more from the world than it was selling, and the biggest chunk of that deficit was a massive $375 billion, with China alone. For the Trump administration, this was just an unacceptable economic vulnerability.
The strategy was pretty direct: impose tariffs on Chinese goods. But China's retaliation was just as direct, and it was surgically precise. They targeted the one product that would inflict the most political pain: American agricultural exports, like soybeans. In an instant, U.S. farmers lost their single biggest customer, creating a massive crisis that demanded a new, huge market to replace China.
And this brings us right to the heart of the standoff today. The United States, with its agricultural sector in crisis, desperately needs access to a market the size of India. But India, scarred by the memory of PL 480 and terrified of the biological trap of GM seeds, sees opening that market as an existential threat. Something has to give. The only question is what or who.